Hi everybody, Jeff Johnson, creator of WeatherMaker. I would like to demo the new volumetric lighting and fog that I've added to WeatherMaker. Now WeatherMaker's always had fog, but the fog has used a 2D noise texture and algorithm, which obviously has had its issues. So I've worked hard at getting the fog to use a proper 3D noise texture, and I think it looks a lot better. So let's dive in and I'll show you what this is all about. So let's look at the fog. I'll go ahead and turn that on. This looks like the same fog that you've always seen in WeatherMaker. I've improved the scattering so you see the sun looks a lot better, and this is in linear lighting. Your results may differ if you're using gamma. But the scattering looks a lot better and more realistic. You can see the sun scattering nice and smoothly there as it passes over the sky. The next thing I've added to the fog is 3D noise, so let's take a look at that. Fog noise has been changed a little bit, and I've removed fog noise height, which warps the fog. Because of the 3D noise and these new parameters, the fog noise height is no longer necessary, and it had quite a few glitches in it that made it look really bad, especially if you were moving. It would move really fast, and it just had a lot of bugs, so I removed it. So let's go ahead and turn on the noise. For this global full screen fog, I can do that by sliding the noise multiplier. So you'll notice that this increases the noise more and more. If you look at the screen here, you can see this fine mist moving around. Now we have this blowing fog here. The fog velocity is set to X1 and Z3. Feel free to change these to be a lot smaller if you don't like the blowing mist effect. For example, you could lower these to be a lot smaller, and now you have a very slow kind of misty looking fog, which actually looks pretty good. And as you move through the fog, it's nice fully 3D texture now. So you can see that it moves in very smooth transitions as you pass through the fog. It's almost like you're flying through a cloud. And now you'll want to tweak the noise multiplier, noise adder parameters to get the fog looking like you want. So I'll go ahead and play with those right now. Noise multiplier simply increases the intensity of every noise calculation. Noise adder adds a constant to every noise calculation, so between the two you can change the sparseness of your fog. So if you're going to be doing something like this where you've got kind of fog areas but they're not fully covering the screen, you would probably want to put the velocity a little bit higher so that you get this kind of nice mist blowing effect. And this works really well if you're changing the fog height, which that parameter's still here, so you can lower that. And now we've got this kind of misty ground fog here just blowing. Could even lower that velocity a little more. You can change the color. Like if I wanted a nice swampy fog, now I've got a swamp basically. And all of this is done without particle systems. It's all a full screen effect. And pretty performant, I think. I'm pretty proud of the performance of this. The one thing that might impact your performance is if you choose to use the volumetric lighting. So I'll go ahead and show you how that works. You'll notice this EnableFogLights checkbox. That's the checkbox that turns on volumetric lighting. For the prefabs, this is turned off, but in the demo scene it's on by default. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. For the volumetric lighting, you need to have the fog intersecting your lights. So I'll go back to the full screen fog. Let's take a look at our two lights here. I've added a spotlight to the demo scene. You can't really see a whole lot of it because it's the daytime, so the daytime drowns out the lights. As I shift to the night, you'll see these lights start to come in. So now both of these lights are intersecting the fog. You can see the fog moving nice and smoothly through this spotlight, and also this point light here. Now I'm going to probably go ahead and remove the fog noise and just get a full fog effect here so you can see what this looks like without the distortions from the noise. The spotlight looks really nice, fades nice and cleanly at the edges. Let's take a look at some of the parameters of the light manager. The light manager controls how the volumetric lighting works. And we've also got spot and point light quadratic, which is set up to match unity. So this will work for the clouds, for example, and any other weather maker effect that does per vertex and per pixel lighting that's not volumetric. But let's take a look at what the spotlight does for the spotlight quadratic does. You can see it basically controls how it falls off at range. As a spotlight light goes out, it tends to fall off a little bit, and that's what this parameter does. Point light quadratic doesn't affect the volumetric lighting, it only affects the per pixel and per vertex non-volumetric lighting. Fog directional light intensity. Let's go back to the daytime so you can see what that does. That affects the sun scatter. So right now it's set at 8. If you lower that, there's no scatter. If you raise that, the scatter becomes more intense. Depending on what you want, you can tweak that. But remember, this is a power function, so if you get really high, performance might be impacted. So just be aware of that. Let's go back to nighttime, and I'll show you the rest of these parameters. Spotlight radius fall off simply controls how the light falls off at the edges. You can see there's much more of a fade now, and it's become more dim all the way to here, which is really dim. Now if you're looking for that kind of fading spotlight effect, you might just consider lowering your intensity and reducing the angle. You could get a very similar effect by doing that. But those other parameters are there to get kind of an additional fade effect on your spotlights. I've tried to pick a default that's pretty good. The fog light intensity power basically says for the light intensity, how much does that intensity affect the volumetric lighting. Obviously with a 1 there's a linear increase for light intensity, and as this goes up, light intensity exponentially increases for every level of intensity. So let's take a look at intensity's effect. You can see there's quite a dramatic effect as you increase that intensity. Pretty closely matches Unity's lighting there at the bottom. And then as you increase this fog light intensity power higher, that intensity is going to ratchet up even faster. So again, I've tried to pick good solid defaults there so that you don't have to mess with it. Let's take a look at these last two parameters. Fog light intensity reducer is basically as the sun gets brighter, what does that do to these volumetric lights? You can see that they're almost invisible now. And so if we reduce fog light intensity, you'll notice the point light comes in more. The spotlight is actually about the same color as the fog, so it's kind of hard to see. But it basically says as the sun gets brighter, reduce the fog volumetric lights by this amount. Finally, we've got this WeatherMaker Texture Fog Noise 3D. That's an asset that I created from a 3D texture, and it lives in Textures, Noise, WeatherMaker Texture Fog Noise 3D. Now this is taken from the public domain Slightly Mad Volumetric Lighting GitHub project. So I took it from there, made it a 3D texture, and it looks quite nice for the fog noise. While I'm here, I'm going to very quickly turn on the fog sphere and fog cube. So those are also using the same 3D fog. And so if you just need fog in a small area, these work great. You can see the fog looks really nice and misty there. You can do the same thing with these outer parameters to get some gaps in the fog if you want to have areas where there is no fog. So if you were having like an orb or a small room with fog in it, this fog sphere, or maybe even better for a room, the fog cube, would be great candidates to just plop in that room and then go to town tweaking these parameters till the fog looks exactly like you want. So that's pretty much all there is to volumetric fog, and there is probably one additional parameter we need to go over. So let me turn the fog back on. We'll go back to full daytime. Let's get this velocity back up. Turn on the noise again. There's a parameter, fog noise sample count. So as the 3D algorithm creates a noise value, it does have to do a little bit of marching through the scene to accumulate noise. That's how you can move through this smoothly without it looking really funny and jittery like it did before. And that's a parameter that says step this many times. Now it's pretty fast. There's no branching in here. It's just a simple texture lookup for every sample. But you'll notice as this goes low, the noise looks a little bit more jittery, I guess is probably the best word. So as you move through it, you may notice some level of weird looking, like you can see it kind of blinks a little bit more. I mean, it still looks pretty good at a sample count of 7. So if you're targeting mobile or lower end platforms, you could probably lower that to 5 or 10. But for a desktop GPU, I mean, I'm using a laptop with a mobile GPU that's several years old, and it has no problem, 60 frames per second, easy peasy. So finally, remember with the full screen fog, you do have the option to turn on a blur shader to give a little bit extra blur. That can help it look a little bit nicer. You can also downsample if you're noticing performance isn't the best, and during the daytime especially, you don't really notice the downsampling, and especially with a mist like this that's moving, you can hardly even tell that there's a downsample going on. So feel free to play with those parameters to give you an additional appearance boost and performance boost if you need it. The downsample scale goes all the way to 1/4, and even at 1/4 here I don't see any difference with this mist fog, but you may see a difference if you're not using the fog noise. Now you can see that the trees, even though they're blurred, do look a little bit downsampled, and then as we go back up they look a lot more crisp. Finally, watch the dither if you're noticing some weird things at night. Play around with this dither parameter. You can see as it goes up things get horrible, but I've left it at a value that I think is pretty good to eliminate that banding, so make sure to play with that parameter. Alright, if you made it to the end of this video, congratulations. Please email me, support@digitalruby.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I would love your feedback on the new volumetric lighting. Before I go, I want to spin the spotlight around a little bit so you can see kind of how it looks at all angles. I'm really happy with the way the spotlight looks. Spent a lot of time getting it to look nice. You'll notice as it looks at you, it gets that nice bright effect like a normal spotlight would. So feel free to play with the range on this, the angle, intensity, come up with flashlights. By the way, there is a flashlight built in. It looks pretty nice cutting through the fog there. Searchlights, I can see a lot of uses for this volumetric spotlight, so go to town. Just remember the volumetric lighting is probably a little bit more expensive than other weather maker effects, so be sure not to put too many lights in it, and as long as there's not more than 5 or 10 visible lights, you're probably fine. Just don't expect to do dozens of cars with headlights and spotlights, because that'll probably kill the performance. So anyway, thanks for watching, have a great day, and bye-bye.